Hello, it's your boy, Matthew Walden. I'm one of the interns here at NAOBC, and this is Devotionables, brief devotions for busy people just like you, and we are continuing our series in the book of Ruth. So today we're going to be looking at Ruth 1, verses 19 through 21. And just to give us some context, I want to kind of remind us what we've been looking at so far in this series. And so we followed the story of Naomi. Her and her family traveled to the country of Moab because of a famine, and while they were there, her husband and her two sons both died. She was left with her daughter-in-laws, and she said, "No, it's fine. I'm heading back to Judah, but you guys stay here." But this lady named Ruth said, "No way. I'm going to follow you. I'm going to be like you. Your God is going to become my God." And so where we are right now is Naomi and Ruth are returning to the country of Judah. So let me read these verses and we'll get started. Starting in verse 19. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" And so what we have in this story is Ruth and Naomi, they come back to the country of Judah, and all these ladies, they see them come back and they say, "Oh, we think that's our friend Naomi." And she says instinctively, "No, it's not Naomi, it's Mara. The Lord has dealt very bitterly with me. Things are different. I left with a husband and sons, and I came back and I have nothing," right? And so as we begin to interpret this passage, it's really important for us to think about two things that are different for us today. One of those is if you're a Hebrew woman during this time, really your whole identity is wrapped up in your family, right? Your husband, your sons, your children, right? Because you think back to the charge that God gave to Adam and Eve. He said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply." And so if you have no way to be fruitful and multiply, what good are you, right? And that's different than us today because, you know, in the church, right, there are many single Christian ladies in the church, and you don't have to be married and have children to go and make disciples, right? And so that's a little different. Another thing that's different is just how significant names are in the Old Testament. For example, Abraham, right? That name, Abraham, actually means father of many. And when you think back to the covenant that God made with Abraham, He said, "I'm going to make your offspring as numerous as the stars in the sky, as numerous as the grains of sand on the beach." And then Samuel, right? His mother prayed that she would have a son. And when she finally did, she named him Samuel, which means God has heard. And so in my Bible, there's two little footnotes for verse 20. Verse 20 says, "She said to them, 'Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara.'" Naomi has a footnote, and it says, "Naomi means pleasant." And then there's another footnote for Mara, and it says, "Mara means bitter." And so effectively what she's doing is she's coming back and she's saying, "Hey, don't call me pleasant, call me bitter. I'm bitter. The Lord has dealt with me bitterly." And so when we look about and we think about those two cultural differences, it really helps us to better interpret this passage. And so there are really three truths that I think we can pull out of this passage when we think about those interpretive keys. And so the first one that I think is really good for us to remember is that there's a good God who is in control of all things. And so that word "good" is very, very important in that statement, because if there was just some God who is in control of all things, well, that could turn out really bad. But we know that the God of the Bible is a good God, right? And so when we don't necessarily know how all of this is going to work together, you know, we go through trials and tribulations. Well, He's good. He's working it for our good, for His glory. A second truth that's really important for us to remember is that as people, we have a finite perspective on things. And so, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this. This might be a spoiler. But if we look to the end of the book of Ruth, in chapter 4, verse 14 and 15, it says, "Then the women said to Naomi, 'Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age for your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him.'" And so what happens at the end of Ruth is that Ruth, she gets married, she has a baby, and she gives that son over to Naomi. Naomi had no idea that was going to happen, right? And then towards the end of chapter 4, it says that they named him Obed. And it turns out that Obed was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David, right? And what do we know about David? He's in the line of Jesus. And so Naomi had no idea that her offspring was going to eventually lead to the Messiah. And then the third truth that's really important for us to remember is that God can withstand our honest emotions, right? So Naomi didn't hide the fact that she was tore up. And if you look throughout the testimony of the Bible, you see people like Jeremiah who doesn't hide the fact that he was tore up, or David in the Psalms, the other psalmists, or Job even. And so God's character, it can withstand our genuine lament. And so don't be afraid to hide your lament. Express that to God when going through trials. So thank you guys for tuning in to this devotionable. I hope you guys have a great day.